Chan in Reno captures many of the symbols, I guess you would say, of the Reno divorce trade. Taking the cure.
The divorce seekers.
Renovation.
Divorce calling.
Going Reno.
Reno cure, yeah. It was just another expression that came about where it meant the equivalent of I'm going to Reno for 6 weeks to get a cure. I'm going to cure myself of this dummy I'm married to.
The courthouse was known as the House of Divide.
Renovation, that was a Walter Winchell coined phrase.
One of our great myths in Reno is whether or not anybody ever threw one of their rings off the Virginia Street Bridge into the Truckee River, which was called the Bridge of Sighs, a concept that was floated originally by a fellow who wrote a very colorful brochure in 1927, and one of his colorful phrases was that there were so many rings thrown in the Truckee River that the trout had gold rings on their fins. The truth lies somewhere in the middle. I think some people did and some people didn't, but the idea of giving up your ring either to the deep, if you will, of the Truckee River, or at the Flying M.E., in M.E. Wood's case where she kept a box where people would deposit their rings. I think it was very much a symbolic act to leave your ring perhaps behind in Nevada. Just mentioning the name Reno during that period, people immediately knew what you meant.
Oh, the taxi trade was very prosperous.
Cab drivers could, in those days, be entrepreneurs because you could get kickbacks that were legal from the judge who married somebody or gave them a divorce. You get a kickback from a hotel if you brought somebody from the bus or train station.
It was a very up-and-coming business, and they hired good people to be taxi drivers. They were making money on that.
The hotel where the scene was set was just the perfect location because that would have represented the Riverside Hotel, which was the grandest hotel in town. And it would have been full of divorce seekers and probably some murderers and all kinds of things. It's really one of the most perfect divorce stories of that period. The 1930s, I think, is a fascinating decade because it comes off of the Roaring Twenties. So there was certainly in the minds of people in our moral code a certain loosening or at least a questioning of those previous taboos. But there was this economic disaster going on.
The crash happened in fall of 29, and by 1930 people knew the country was in for a bad time, and it became known as the Great Depression. But it wasn't so great, I've always said.
People didn't have a lot of money. And here there were scads of people coming to Reno, Nevada, to stay for 6 weeks to get divorced.
Gambling encouraged tourism. The divorce business was great for the lawyers in Reno, but it was great for the people that owned an apartment house or a taxi cab. If people came to Nevada, they had to pay their lawyers, they had to buy meals and a place to sleep for 6 weeks. And as you can see, that just, as hundreds started to come, that added up paying the big bucks. So the benefactors to the divorce trade was primarily the local residents of Nevada.
Divorce is the one industry that the Depression can't touch. So people are working in it and they're making money. And in fact, the divorce trade pretty much saw Reno through the Depression. Traditionally and historically, Nevada's main economic industries were mining and agriculture, and of course the railroad was involved there too, are fairly boom and bust types of industries. So Nevada legislature very early on knew that in order to survive as a state, they were going to have to figure out a way to make money.
It was called the sin solution. It was what they called, Nevada called it that.
Nevada's key to the quick divorce was the residency period.
The residence requirement in Nevada was 6 weeks for a divorce. You had to stay here for 6 weeks to establish your residence.
People from New York, where they had to wait at least a year for a divorce and had to prove adultery in order to get a divorce in those days. And in California, it was a good year's wait. And it was just not, people didn't want to wait that long. People came from every state, not only in the United States, they came from Europe, from England, France, and so forth.
You have to be in touch with the person who's going to be your resident witness in court, and that's usually the manager of wherever you're staying. It's either the homeowner or the boarding house manager, the hotel manager, the person who runs the divorce ranch. That's the person who's going to go to the court and testify under oath that, yes, I saw this woman in my home every day for 6 weeks.
Usually took about 5-10 minutes to obtain a divorce.
Many people came to Reno to get a divorce and would get divorced in the divorce court, by the judge, who would, turn around in his bench and marry her to somebody else who was there waiting in the wings. And that happened a lot.
When people knew they could come here and get that divorce and it was legal, more came.
During the decade of the 30s, there were more than 30,000 divorces handed out in the Washoe County Courthouse. There were probably in excess of 100 lawyers, and this is for a community of about 18,500 permanent residents.
Well, during this period, my grandfather studied law and passed the bar, and among other things, involved himself in the divorce practice too. I remember as a child in the late 1940s coming down to this courthouse, this very courtroom, and waiting for him in the summer. This was Department 1 of the 2nd Judicial District Court, presided over by Barney Moran. 1910 to 1939, I believe, 29 years. He granted 1,500 or more divorces per year. He used to complain that he shouldn't be known as the divorce judge of America. He should be known as the marriage judge of America, because he actually performed more marriages than he did grant divorces. But it wasn't seen that way in the public's eye across the country. Could have been known as the marriage capital of the world. The wealthy and the poor darkened these doors. You might have Vanderbilt in here. You may have a movie star come in here.
As the movie opened, the woman on her way to Reno could have been any number of guests that came to the ranch.
The divorce ranches are actually an interesting phenomenon.
Many people stayed in boarding houses or dude ranches for their divorces.
I think you can see what happened was people started converting houses, bigger houses, into apartment buildings. Sometimes they would just rent a room because they needed the income.
The group of people who ran divorce ranches and who ran boarding houses, now this is a generalization, had been divorce seekers themselves. So Emmy Wood at the Flying M.E. would certainly have been part of that tradition.
Most of the guests that came were actually looking forward to freedom.
But by then, Reno had a special kind of dude, and in fact, divorce seekers of both genders were called dudes.
A lawyer from New York, no matter how big the law firm, might call a lawyer in Reno and say, I've got this client, where do you recommend I have her stay? And that lawyer in Reno would say, Flying M.E., if it was the right kind of person. The lawyers quickly in Reno, the better ones, quickly knew what kind of clientele Emmy wanted, which was upscale, but I got to know a lot of them, and they were lovely people, and they were down to earth.
The divorce ranches had certain other reputations involving high living, and maybe even acting out in ways that you certainly would never have done back home. People who worked in the divorce trade were very careful to take care of the sensitive feelings of the people who were coming to get a divorce.
It's about 1920. My grandparents bought a motel in Reno, the Silver State Lodge. My father, when he came out of World War II, when that was over, decided to buy that business from my grandparents. But my early years were there on that property. So it was a very profitable and lucrative business. We were getting more divorcees staying at the motel in the wintertime.
The divorce ranches had the reputation of being a place where, in a sense, people did come to be rejuvenated. I would say during the 20th century, particularly the first half of the 20th century, that it was the divorce trade that really got Reno on the map.
There's something about Reno that has been appealing to people and attracting people for years.
It was a place where you could essentially exist on any level you wanted to. You could hide away in a boarding house room. You could live it up on a divorce ranch. It was just a place that focused on catering to these people who were coming for a divorce.
The town was open 24 hours a day for entertainment.
Being in Reno for 6 weeks or 3 months or 6 months, depending on what time period it was really a part of your life. I mean, it must have been similar to, you know, people who enter the convent. I mean, this would have been a life-changing experience.